Oh, you know you're in for a trip when the freaking save screen doesn't even work right. So there's a particular game dev term some of you may be familiar with, known as developer difficulty. This is something that comes about when one or more people producing a game end up adapting to the difficulty of their creation so much that they subconsciously keep making it harder and harder. The end result is that when people who aren't involved with the game finally get their hands on it, the general consensus is that it's way too hard. And from there, the developers will either tone down the difficulty or simply ignore the feedback, because to them, the game's not difficult at all. What are those people being paid to provide feedback know? Well, today's ancient DOS game is Heroes 1: The Sanguine Seven, and it is a prime example of how to make a game far too difficult and far too unforgiving, leading to an experience which can only really be enjoyed once you know exactly what to expect at every moment in every single level. On top of that, there's a number of questionable design decisions coursing throughout this experience, things which inherently and intentionally make the game even harder, as if the game wasn't hard enough already. As we go through this, I'll be describing all of these things and noting what could have made them more appropriate and approachable, though I do want to make it clear, the main issue with the game is the extremely high degree of difficulty. Most of what's here is otherwise pretty impressive, given that it was made almost entirely by just one person. It's just said person really should have gotten some critical feedback on this thing before letting it loose into the world. Although speaking from experience as a solo developer, getting decent critical feedback from the people you know personally can be kind of hard because they're often too afraid to offend you, even when you ask them to be as brutally honest as possible. Anyways, before we dive any deeper, I should quickly address something sent in by one of my Patreon supporters, Martin, who noted, "I have a vague memory that the Sanguine 7 registered version was also available to order from Epic Mega Games, which released the tantalizing trio as shareware, yet I cannot find any information that an Epic Mega Games branded 7 Heroes version with the title correction exists." So I looked into this, and there's a couple important things to remember here. The first is that Epic was technically never involved with this game. Though when Safari Software agreed to publish the game, they were at that time a part of Epic Mega Games, so the Epic Mega Games name does appear in the shareware version of this game, but only to indicate that they are the parent company of Safari Software. The other important thing to keep in mind is that, unlike a lot of shareware titles which started out as a shareware game which you could register, Heroes 1 started out as an indie title which did not have a shareware release, but the game's author, Jeffery Fullerton, managed to get the interest of Safari Software, who agreed to publish the game on the grounds that a shareware release was also made, with updates to correct the spelling and grammar, as well as add appropriate ordering info in Safari Software banners. Yet the free shareware version of the game, known more specifically as Heroes 1/4: The Tantalizing Trio, came 9 months after the full game was made available for sale. However, whether an updated release of the full game exists or not, I don't think so, but I have no evidence either way. When Jeffery Fullerton made the game freeware in the mid-2000s, the version of the game he uploaded for everyone was what he had created prior to Safari Software assuming publishing duties. So if an updated version of the full game does exist, it has long been lost to the stretches of time. Meaning, if you happen to be sitting on a copy, freaking get it uploaded online ASAP, especially with there being no reason not to, with the game having been freeware for the past 2 decades. Heroes 1: The Sanguine Seven was originally released in July of 1993, self-published by Jeffery Fullerton himself, with the shareware version coming later in April of 1994, now being published through Safari Software, and it's a one-player run-and-gun platformer. The original full release of the game uses EGA 320x200 16-color graphics. However, the shareware release of Heroes 1/4: The Tantalizing Trio runs more specifically in VGA 320x200 16-color mode, with a somewhat modified palette which has deeper tones, but it's otherwise very similar to the colors of the standard EGA palette, yet it refuses to run in EGA mode, which is weird given that the palettes are not much different from each other. In terms of audio, both games use the PC speaker for sound effects, but when it comes to music, things get a little weird. All of the music in the game is synthesized, but the game is using Creative's own FM synth functionality, so the music only works on Sound Blaster cards. But worse still, even though the shareware version of the game runs fine if you don't have a Sound Blaster card, the full game runs abysmally slow if it fails to detect a Sound Blaster, and I'm not entirely certain if this is emulation related or not. As for its current release date, the game was made freeware back in 2005, and while I would normally recommend the DOS Games website for old and forgotten games like this one when an official site no longer exists, the DOS Games website only hosts the full game and not the shareware version, which is pertinent because the shareware version does not have the same set of initial levels as the full game. So if you want to grab both, I would instead recommend the RGB Classic Games website at www.classicdosgames.com, as despite the state that site is in, the downloads for this game there both still work as of my making this video. So the game technically has a story, but it's paper thin. Put simply, a selection of evil villains have smashed their way out of the slammer and are now stirring up a smattering of havoc. Thus it all stands on the shoulders of your team of 7 sanguine superheroes to put a stop to their sinister escapades. Now I should point out, that is the one feature of this game which really stands out, is that you have 7 different heroes you can choose from, each of whom plays somewhat differently from each other, including the leader, known as the Flying Squirrel, an inventor known as the Rocketress, the heavily armored Lead Man, a nuclear-powered time traveler from the future known as the Spaced Cadet, a tiny master of jumping known as the Flea, a wall-climbing madman who ate one too many sticks of gum known as Gumwad, and the man made of water known simply as the Drip, all of whom have an analog to a more prominent or recognizable superhero. Lead Man instead of Iron Man, the Rocketress instead of the Rocketeer, the Flea instead of Ant-Man, just to name the ones I'm sure of. Each character also has 4 different stats, but this is where we already begin running into issues with the game's design, and we haven't even started playing the actual game yet. The 4 different stats are health, power, jump, and ammo. The health is how many hits the hero can take, jump is their jumping height, ammo is how much ammo they presently have, which carries over between levels, and power is how powerful their superhero ability is. The health stat makes sense. The jump stat also makes sense, sort of. There's an exception we'll get to a bit later. The ammo stat is kinda weird because you could end up with a hero with no ammo left who'll be hard to make any use of. And then there's the power stat, which is almost worthless. Let's go in order here. Gumwad's power is wall climbing and is directly tied to his health, so power stat is useless. The Spaced Cadet's power is a nuclear pistol which kills pretty much all enemies in one shot and never runs out of energy, so power stat is useless. The Flying Squirrel's power is to glide in the air and is directly tied to his health, so power stat is useless. The Drip's power is to become a puddle of water which is impervious to damage and is completely unlimited in usage, but immovable while in that state, so power stat is useless. The Flea's power is to jump exceptionally high and is directly tied to his health, so power stat is useless. The Rocketress's power is a rocket boost to do a very large jump at any point in time, even while in midair, with each boost consuming 1 unit of power. Okay, so her power stat actually means something. And finally, Leadman's power is to absorb extra damage. So, while his power stat isn't useless, it's also nothing more than a second health bar. The crazy thing is, it did not have to be this way. What would have worked out better would be to tie powers to the power stat in such a way that they have limited uses which either recharge over time or upon completion of an action, and this would have worked out fine for all of the heroes. Again, going in order. Gumwad's power stat would have made more sense as a maximum number of wall jumps possible between touchdowns on the ground. The Spaced Cadet's nuclear pistol could have only done ultimate damage while charged, consuming 1 power per shot, recharging slowly following, instead of consuming ammo. The Flying Squirrel's power could have been a maximum glide time per touchdown on the ground, similar to Gumwad. The Drip's puddle power could have lost a point with each transformation and recharge at a fair rate of, 1 per 10 seconds or such, or fully upon diving into the water. The Flea's power jump could have been similar, recharging at a rate of 1 power jump per number of seconds. The Rocketress also could have been given some recharging instead of only having X number of rocket boosts per level and that's it. And Leadman's power could have instead been extended post-hit invincibility, which could be made longer with more power. Anyways, let's get to the actual gameplay. Beyond moving left and right, you have 4 main controls: jump, shoot, power, and look. Now, jumping and shooting are fairly obvious, though your special power is placed on a separate button, which, given the nature of the game, can be a bit confusing, such as how the drip can do a normal duck by pressing down, but to become a puddle and double duck, as it's referred to, you need to press the power button. And you also have a button to look around, which locks you in place and lets you rapidly scroll the screen to see around you. Now, given the nature of the gameplay, looking around is an essential thing to learn how to do so as to not get blindsided by enemies, and so you can more easily tell where you should or should not be going. The other thing you've probably noticed by now too is that the game feels like it's running a bit fast, but no, this is the intended speed of the game, 18.2 frames per second, the standard interrupt timer rate, which actually makes the game faster than the Apogee titles which inspired this one, as if you go back to the original Duke Nukem, that game runs at 16 frames per second. Yeah, Heroes 1 plays almost 14% faster than Duke Nukem, which isn't a lot, and in most cases shouldn't be that big of a deal, but Duke Nukem already played pretty fast, meaning that extra bit of speed makes everything just that much harder, especially when coupled with the differences in post-hit invincibility. Duke Nukem gives you about 1.25 seconds of post-hit invincibility, or 20 frames, whereas Heroes 1 gives you only half the number of frames, 10, which equates to just over half a second of real time. You can lose all of your health real fast in this game. This kind of ties into the overall level design, which is kind of excessive. Now the funny thing is, I think the levels here in this game are actually similar in size to the levels in the first Duke Nukem, but they sure feel larger, because the overall level design is just not that good. The vast majority of the levels just feel like a maze of stacked straight hallways, with as much level being cramped into every tile of the map as is possible, and instead of going for designs which actually have any semblance of nuance or shape or purpose, or just anything other than straight hallways everywhere. Now, that's not to say there aren't any exceptions, but they are the minority for sure. Plus, there's another problem with these levels, which is ironically not a problem with the design itself, but is instead rather a feature of the game's mechanics, which gets exemplified into a problem by the way the majority of the levels have been designed. All enemies in a level are being processed at all points in time, no matter where they are and no matter where the player is. The reason this is a problem is because half of the enemies in the game fire bullets. Now, couple that with long straight corridors with no obstacles to speak of, and it creates a situation where you end up constantly dodging bullets which are coming from enemies which could be the entire length of the level away from you, and yet you're not allowed to shoot them back because not only are the player's shots interrupted by enemy shots, they also disappear when they leave the screen, because that's fair, right? I mean, look at this mess. Bullets flying freaking everywhere from massive distances away from where I am because this entire level is composed of floating platforms. And you might be thinking this seems appropriate for a later level in the game that's supposed to be really hard, but guess what? This is level 2. Now, one of the more interesting mechanics, which comes about from the whole notion that you've got an entire squad of superheroes at your command, is that when you die, well, not if you die, when you die, your hero will become encased in a protective bubble, at which point you have to choose a different hero to go in and rescue them, then proceed to clear the level appropriately. If you clear the level without rescuing any heroes who've gone down, the level doesn't count as completed and you need to go back in and try again. Though what's interesting about this is that the state of the level stays as it was, so any ammo or bonuses you collected stay gone, but any enemies you defeated also stay defeated. Unfortunately, despite being a clever way of handling the multiple hero thing, there's a couple problems with this approach. The first is that when a hero is taken out, any gems they collected are gone forever, and you kinda need those gems to power up your heroes to make them stronger, plus finding them is already hard enough, so it really sucks when you lose them. The bigger problem, though, is that almost every level has places only specific characters can reach. For instance, here in the third level, I ended up getting shot and killed from way off screen after rocketing up to this platform here. Well, turns out pretty much all of the other heroes can't reach this platform. I mean, except maybe the Flea, but that wasn't going to help anyways because after I restarted the level entirely and made a ton of progress, I realized the level can only be successfully cleared by the flying squirrel due to a required glide. It might be possible to use the Rocketress, but if you end up losing both of those characters, you would be thoroughly screwed. In fact, that's one incredibly simple change which could have made the game immeasurably better because of the nature of these levels and how some of them are designed to be tackled by specific heroes. It should have been made possible to go back the way you came in. That way, by doing that, you could secure any gems you found, restore the health of your heroes, get access to the heroes you need again by rescuing them, and because the game already saves the state a level is in when you save the game, it's not like making this change would have been difficult. But no, when you select a hero to enter a level, it is committal. You cannot back out. In fact, because some heroes can easily get stuck, such as Leadman with his reduced jumping skills by default, pressing H on the keyboard is basically a call for help button, which acts no differently than just immediately losing all your health. And speaking of the gems, I have a little bit of an aesthetic pet peeve with how they've been handled on screen. Well, let me demonstrate. Here in the help section, the gems are laid out in the following pattern. Diamond up top since it gives a bonus to everything, rubies for health in the top left, emeralds for jumping in the top right, sapphires for power in the bottom left, and topazes for ammo in the bottom right. So far so good. Now let's look at the hero stats. Health is top left, jumping is top right, power is bottom left, and ammo is bottom right. Okay, that makes sense, and it makes it easier to correlate everything. But it's a lot of effort to go back to the help screen. So if we could assume this is all consistent, then using gems on our heroes should be easy enough, right? Well, when you go to use a gem, diamonds are above everything, rubies are top left, sapphires are top right, emeralds are bottom left, and topazes are bottom right. The sapphires and emeralds are freaking swapped. The early game, when you're trying to memorize which gems go to which stats, this is going to trip you up hard, since the consistency is broken right when it matters most, yet it's kept everywhere else. Or heck, you could even argue that the game should be telling you what each gem will restore right before you go to use one. Now that's a fair argument too, but I'm trying to give some benefit of the doubt here, and the way this was done just screams at me as a massive oversight. And I guess the last thing I should mention is the length of the game because, oh man, you're not ready for this. For a game this difficult, where it took me a solid 6 hours just to reach the first boss on level 10, you would think maybe it wouldn't be that big of a game. Oh silly viewer, this game's 50 freaking levels long. I mean, at this point, I'm starting to think this game was built specifically for people with a certain level of masochism in their brains, because I was almost ready to give up on the third level, given that I spent over an hour just trying to clear that one. However, to be fair, I'm pretty sure Jeffrey knew he created a monster of a game, because when you grab the freeware release that he put out in the mid-2000s, guess what it comes with? Save files to start you on any of 48 of the 50 levels included with this game. Yet for some reason, there's no saves included for level 21 or the final level, level 50. But the point is, if you find the game far too difficult, because it is, and want to see more of the game, that's one way to go about doing it. Overall, Heroes 1: The Sanguine Seven is a game which had a lot of promise, but suffers from a severely high level of difficulty, coupled with mechanics which were clever in concept, but not in execution. The thing is, this game doesn't feel that far away from being exceptional, it just needed some significant tweaks to get it there, like better handling of the superhero powers, that the power stat would actually carry some meaning, the smaller level sizes, not having to be shot by enemies halfway across the map, being able to return to base mid-level to secure gems and rescues, a little more post-hit invincibility, and just stronger level design overall. I will admit though, that even though the game itself is overly punishing, I'm also not blind to the subtle things that the game is doing right. For instance, the Drip, being a water-based being, shoots water as an attack, and is thus the only one of the 7 who can damage the otherwise invincible flame enemies. Or because Leadman is so heavy, he sinks below water and loses health as he rusts away. Or that some of the enemies are actually able to step up to higher ground when faced with a small change in elevation. Or that there is not a single shred of randomness anywhere in this game, except maybe the automatopoeia which shows up when things get hit, which means once you know the movement and firing patterns of particular enemies, they become, well, I don't want to say easier, so I'll instead say slightly less of a threat. The point is, The game is a mix of both good and bad ideas coupled with extreme difficulty and a hyper-extended playtime. It's not unplayable, and it's not that unfair. Just be aware of what you're getting yourself into if you decide to give it a try. At least the game runs in DOSBox without any extra configuration. Just leave cycle set to auto and you're good to go. Now that said, the joystick support only supports 2 buttons. To perform a power move, you have to hold both the jump and fire buttons at the same time, and there's no way to look around to see the dangers and power-ups around you, plus the game acts weird if you try to mix joystick and keyboard controls together. So a better approach is to just use DOSBox's key mapper to map your joystick or gamepad entirely to keyboard inputs, if you intend to play the game that way. Anywho, that'll be all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next up, 2 Saturdays from now, on June 28th, will be a filler video, and this time around, we're going to be taking a look back at some DOS games we've already covered on the show to experience their full PC speaker glory. With just one little caveat. None of these will be games you intentionally or desired to play with PC speaker sound effects. Yeah, stay tuned to see just how far legacy PC speaker support went when DOS game developers were intending people to be playing their games with proper sound cards. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to everyone supporting me on Patreon. If you'd like to join the ranks of everyone you see here supporting the show directly, head on over to patreon.com/KASICK.